Cheers, everyone. I made a somewhat recent video about inactivism. It was a reply to Matt, aka that. Um, and he was talking about consciousness as a sort of field that neurons pick up on, and as a sort of radio transmitter. And I kind of pounded on that, partially because what he was describing was the view that I had formerly held and kind of abandoned after being exposed to what I would consider more sophisticated theories of consciousness. And in my reply, I got comments from Stephen Ernest, who was defending basically the mind-brain identity theory, or at least a kind of epiphenomenalism, where he was just saying that science proves apparently that the consciousness is caused by brain activity. And I kind of challenged him on that a little bit, and we butted heads a little bit. I don't think we really came to any sort of agreement where we kind of, or even an agreement to disagree. So I thought I'd make a little video here where I put up a more robust defense of panexperientialism, and alongside it introduce a concept that I've become recently acquainted with called phenomenological externalism. So I think I should first begin with a little history. Basically history of what we now know as scientific materialism. A lot of people don't realize that the sort of modern scientific materialist paradigm actually has its origins in the Catholic Church. Because you see, what the Church was kind of fighting in the Middle Ages was what might be termed magical realism, which is basically the view that nature is inherently magical, or inherently alive, and so a great magician could tap into that and cause miracles to happen. Now, the Church's authority rested on the divinity of Jesus and the authority granted to them by Jesus through Saint Peter, and sort of the justification for Jesus' divinity was based in large part on miracles described in the Bible. So the Church couldn't allow for the idea of miracles being sort of just a part of nature. So instead, they constructed a kind of ontology in which the matter, or nature, was this sort of dead, immovable thing. I didn't do it by own. They borrowed a lot from Aristotle, particularly what we see in the world of Aquinas. Aristotle believed that matter was, could only be moved by an external force, and that's why he talked about the unmoved mover. So, the Church found this a convenient ontology to adopt in any case, and so it created a sort of separation between the world of spirit, or God, on the one hand, and the world of matter. And the idea was you had to have a sort of a natural world which is operated by fixed laws and strict causality, and then you have to have that in order, and then have a God who is the exception to that, or is external to that system, who can then intervene in that system, and create miracles. So basically, the Church wanted to establish the principle that miracles were external to nature; they're caused by God and could not be worked by man. So this sort of system fed into Descartes' thinking, and Descartes, I think, formalized that system in a way that the Church had never done, but it certainly didn't begin with him. And what's interesting is we see over time how during the Enlightenment, the Church kind of drank its own poison in that sense, by where these sort of Enlightenment philosophers took the spirit part of the equation out of it, and eventually we got to a point where we just have the physical world and no spirit acting upon it. And for a while, of course, this still required a deity, so so deists created this idea called nature's God, which was that there was a God who created the world, who was there at the moment of creation, and set about creating these physical laws, but then stayed out of it because the Enlightenment was kind of negative on the idea of miracles. So basically God tuned the clock of the universe, so to speak, to a set of dials, and then let it go. And it's interesting that this ontology is kind of assumed today without people realizing the origins of it, and it's assumed that. I think this is most telling in John Searle when he talks about consciousness. He tells us that, quote, science tells us that matter is insentient and dead and stuff. Yeah, and it does no such thing. Science assumes that matter is insentient. It can't prove that. It does. There's no way to do that. What science does is it measures external relations between objects which are internally perceived phenomena. So John Searle here commits what Whitehead calls the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. The idea of a sort of object which has no experience, or any phenomena which has no experience. Whitehead called it a vacuous actuality. The notion, the non-experiential objects. The thing is, we actually have no evidence of a non-experiential phenomena. The only thing we know for certain exists is an experiential phenomena, namely us. That brings us back to Descartes' cogito. We know that we have experience, and it's the one thing we cannot doubt. But then we perceive things as objects, and we assume that, well, that's the way the world really is, and so that we assume that we're objects, and that's how we get this mystery called the hard problem of consciousness. Namely that how could an object become a subject? In so many words. And it's not, David Chalmers calls that the hard problem of consciousness. But what it really is it's either the hard problem of consciousness is actually either really relatively easy or it's impossible. And actually, for Descartes' part, the sort of difficulty of a non-material mind interacting with a material body was not a problem in his system so much as a feature, because from that's where God came into his system. It's only through the grace of God could a non-material mind interact with a physical body. So, but in any case, back to the present day, I think I've brought up inactivism before, and I've been studying a little bit further into it, because inactivism is actually a subset of a field of philosophy of mind called externalism, externalism basically talks about consciousness, or the consciousness of consciousness being in some way external to the mind, or excuse me, to the brain, excuse me, in other words, it sees consciousness as being outside the body in some sense. Again, there are different levels of externalism. The lowest level is semantic externalism, as advocated by Hilary Putnam when he talks about the twin Earth thought experiment, which basically talks about some other planet which is almost exactly like us, but has some other liquid that's not H2O, but basically plays the same role as water. And for them, that's water instead of H2O being water. So in other words, the essence of what water is not confined to its chemical properties, but it's actually based on its external relations to us. The next step up is inactivism, which I've discussed before, and or that has discussed. It's basically the idea that our concepts about the world or our cognition of the world is based on a sort of pairing of mind and body with the actual world. Basically, it's an embodied consciousness where it's not just our brain that does the thinking, but it's our body too, and the way it interacts with our environment. But since I've started going in the direction of seeing activism as not going far enough. So that brings me to the third level of externalism, which I think best describes me and actually best combines externalism with panexperientialism, which is phenomenological externalism, or some call it radical externalism. This view has been put forth by thinkers such as Ted Hoderick, T. Rockwell, and Riccardo Manzotti. And basically, is the idea that consciousness itself is a process of the internal and external. That phenomenal consciousness itself is an external process, or this is not confined to the brain. And basically, what's interesting about this approach is that we get to not just a new way of thinking about consciousness, but a new way of thinking about the world. So the sort of radical externalism requires us to actually rethink, not just our perception of the world, but the world that we perceive, and thus move to a new ontology. In a sense, that it requires us to overcome not just the Cartesian view of mind, but the Cartesian view of nature. And this is actually kind of very much in a Whiteheadian direction, because we get to understand nature, not as an external world which we pick up with our senses, but actually a relational world of no substances, but just a process. And Ted Hoderick has actually talked about how when we perceive a room, that our perception of the room is not just our perception of it is actually a way that the room exists. Yeah, in a sense, there is no view from nowhere. Reality is just multi-perspectival. It's a potentiality of all the different perspectives, and so every perspective is a way that the world is. So it looks like I'm running out of time here, so I'll pick up where I left off in part 2.